You do realize she's filming this and she is gonna put it on YouTube, so if your wife sees it.
Actually, you just missed the boat. I just turned it on.
Man, did you dodge a bullet.
This is one of the things, I mean, seriously, every Monday, my wife and I get to sit in front of the monitor and watch this, you know, Monday, one of the things, sit there and review.
The woodworkers thing? Cool. And that gives her some ideas as to what you should be doing.
You poor guy.
Why don't you bring her down? We should probably take and have the wives come down, and that way your wife could get some other ideas from the other wives on what you should be doing.
Yeah, because I learned
I
from
ain't
y'all.
bringing my wife.
Yeah, I learned from y'all how to buy a fence tool, whatever, take it home, put some dust on it, then let her walk out the shop, say, oh my God, look, I didn't realize I had this, and then clean it off. I think it's time to become aware that that's a little trick, you know. Getting low, I need to come up with a different approach, you know, get a new tool.
Who wears the pants in your house?
She does.
Is this being recorded? Anyway, go in with it.
Is there any doubt in your mind?
We know who wears the pants in your house, Larry. So, Larry, are you ready?
Anytime.
Go ahead, man. It's all your
This
fault.
has been used, obviously. You see the dust on it.
Sneak around back.
For the gentleman that hasn't cut dados before, I brought this. This is what we used for a long time, and some people still do it to dado set, for your table set. Got outside blades, inside blades. Two of these, as many of these as you need. You put these on, you stack it up with these till you get the thickness you need. You run it through your table saw, and you've got a dado.
It's either too tight or too loose.
It's
either too tight or too loose.
Right. You can put paper in here, you can use masking tape, or Jay can sell you a set of shims. I imagine they still market them, I'm not sure. The brass shims down to 1/1000th of an inch. But working with wood and trying to get to 1/1000th of an inch is kind of an exercise in futility because wood is not that stable. If you work with a piece of steel, you can do it, but we're not. Okay. The super simplest way to cut a dado for someone's brand new is you make yourself a jig. This is all scrap material. This is happens to be 3/4 plywood and 3/4 pop. Just make it any way you want.
That's
Cool.
scrap wood, you said?
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because Jay sold me some, he said you gotta use prime stuff.
Well, Jay's in the business of selling wood. Okay. Now we're gonna cut a dado. This is our shelf. Now I want it to be accurate. See, I got it laid out where it's gonna be. Put that in there like that, and you bring one side up to it. Now, this part here is optional. This will simply make your dado really, really tight. Because you squeeze it together. Take a circle. You're ready to go. That's all there is to it. Now all you have to do is get yourself a pattern bit. If you don't have one, this gentleman does. Pattern bit has the bearing on top, opposed to flush trim bit has the bearing on the bottom. How deep do you want your dado? Take this. Set it there. Now that's the depth of the jig. I want my dado 1/4 inch deep, so you just take this, move it down 1/4 inch. That's all. Get your router. I use this for setting depth on table saw, lots of stuff. So handy, just... Okay. Just like that. We're ready to go. Thank you, Jay. Thank you. It's going to be noisy. One dado finished.
Is there a reason you don't work the other way, or just work toward you?
Whatever way works best. You just don't want to go against the machine because you have to wire part of the project.
What width bit is that, Larry? Something less than
That's-
the thickness of the
Yeah,
shirt.
I think it's a ½ inch.
5/8 would work, 11/16.
No, that's the method I use almost always. It's not foolproof because tools are very ingenious. They can louse up about anything. And I have a PhD in making scraps, right? You know me a while.
I've done it, been there.
Okay, the third method we have, just as easy, just as good. By the way, there's got to be 8,000 ways to make dados, so this is not the only way. Different jig. On this jig, you notice, backing up, this one, where the router went, is nice and straight. This one is not. It's a little lip. Okay. That uses a bushing and a straight bit. So you take your handy dandy router here and change bits. They sometimes have a mind of their own. Like now.
Just tapping it down with a piece of wood is better.
We'll try that. Try again.
Well, with your, that's your wrench and stuff like that.
4-slotted collet.
Let's call it.
3-slotted tend to do that.
What?
It's 3-slotted collet tends to
Yeah, they do.
rebind, but that particular one's a 4-slot.
Okay. It's out, so that's the important part. Now this one I've got to be real careful with because I didn't make the jig right. This jig is only for demonstration today, and then it'll go in the trash can, because it's not something I'll use. Which brings up, I'm glad you mentioned jigs. I found this, I was using my shaper, and the bit came loose. Problem was, I had a half-inch to quarter-inch adapter in the collet, which is fine. It does just fine, except you got to make sure that that adapter hasn't got debris in the slot where it tightens up, because that's what happened to me. It had debris in there, and the collet didn't tighten up. Now, I almost wound up wearing the bit, which is not a good thing. This is a set you can buy, should have told you before, for your router. It's just a bushing set. It comes in several different sizes. It doesn't make a bit of difference what size you have. You can buy one, you can buy a set, doesn't make any difference. Because you're going to make the jig to fit it. With this, you use a straight bit. Any size straight bit you happen to have in your hand. This is what a lot of people use. This is okay. Now this jig is a little different, see? I made it same piece, 2 pieces of scrap wood. And if you're making it, you take 2 pieces of wood, put them together. This can be any distance you want it to be, because you're going to run the router down it. I'll show you in a second. To actually make the jig. Same thing. We'll lay out our layout where we want our dado to be. Since I don't care, I'll just put it here. Make sure your lip is on the line. That's where your dado's going to be. So your jig goes like that. Right up against it. And now it's exactly the same as before. Only difference is the jig. And this. You'll notice this jig. That's your index point. You put that right on the line where you want the dado to be. As opposed to the other one, you have the flat surface one on the line. So you know there's a little gap in here now. That's exactly right. That's what it should have. Same routine. This can be as loose or as tight as you want it to be. That's a loose dado. That's what we'll cut today. And make sure your clamps are tight. Because if you don't, you may wind up with your dado making a right-hand turn when you're halfway through. Has anyone done that? Same exact procedure here. measure down, just exactly like we did before. You always double check like this, see?
Okay, yeah, I cut data with that, that'll work.
Except, some bonehead put the clamp in the wrong spot.
Larry explained the distance between the edge of the cutter and the edge of your guide is the offset amount of your little part jig.
Say what?
The diameter of your bushing,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to the diameter of the cutter.
Mm-hmm.
Distance is...
And that's that little gap we've got here.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't make any difference what that distance is. Because you're gonna make, he's absolutely right. Stay down there. This clamp, I don't know why I bought it. I'll have to move this over. I caught myself right in the middle of a dado. What he's talking about, get this clamp down. Is the distance between this cutter and this edge here. And it really doesn't make any difference as long as you use the same one every time and you make the jig. Like I say, you make this piece, make it any size you want. This is about a ½ inch when I made it. And I didn't want to run that much material through my router, so I put it on a table saw and roughed it down to close to what it was going to be. And then went ahead and run the router through it. I get another dado, I sure did. Sure needs some help with the scrap wood. Well, we're gonna have a white dado there. Go like this. I'm glad I did that, actually. See? I could make a different width dado if I want.
That works? You got it?
We'll just do a different one. That's why I say, spice it with plywood. It's never 3/4 of an inch. Get it?
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah, they will a little bit.
Okay, all right. They're not...
Now, if
They're
I
not
was making a cabinet, I'd worry about it, but they work better when you plug them in. No bit came out, but you got the idea. The reason I had to leave that so far out was when I made the jig, I made it thicker than what I needed it to be. So when you make your jig, don't make it too thick. Or buy, from this gentleman over here, oh, thank you, a straight bit that's longer. How long do you have, Jay?
Oh, they get up to 1.5 inches or so for cutting.
Okay, that's all there is to it. Any questions?
When you were doing the first dado, if you wanted to take and give yourself that little bit of slop so it didn't fit quite so tight, the person could take and put a piece of paper in between there, between your shelf when you set up the jig. That will give you about 10 thousandths difference.
That is exactly right.
So you can put a shim in there to help yourself.
That, or, that's exactly right, to begin with. Or when you set it up, instead of, you saw me use a clamp, like this, to pull it together, to make it nice and tight, like this, as Jay's saying, don't use a clamp, just,
Well, but if you use the clamp and you use the actual spacer, you know exactly how much distance you were gonna leave in there. If you put a 5,000 shim in there, like you
that's
were talking
exactly
about
right.
from,
That is exactly right.
say a Mana, if you've got a Dado set, you have shims that come with them. Most of them, they put on there how thick the shim is,
Mm-hmm.
so you can stick that shim in there, and that will take and help you keep a dado that is appropriate, so you have that little bit of grit gap for your glue and everything else.
Or a feeder gauge, or whatever you want to use.
Right.
Most
And
of,
then
a
most,
piece-
most of the time, my yellow legal pads are about 3,000. Just a piece of paper.
That'll work.
Perfectly.
That'll work.
Right.
This one is fine, just as good as this one. You want to mess with the spacer, doesn't make any difference. I'm lazy, I like to just set it up, boom, done. And unless you make a terrible mistake, like I did one time and used a clamp that wasn't the best clamp in the world, and I had this lady, I was making a bookcase for this lady, and I glued up the panels like Jay's talking about. I forget the wood now, but it wasn't cheap. And I'm going along there, the last dado. Oop! 90-degree turn. What? The clamp slipped. I can't overemphasize, clamp it tight. Right? Get it as tight as you can get it, and then 3 more turns.
So,
Questions? Comments?
Yes,
Suggestions?
talking about, I guess experience would tell you that you need that little extra space, maybe you don't wanna make it so tight, but versus, if you make them, then you say, oh my God, it's so tight. How would you calculate to say, I need to go over a little bit, you know,
Okay.
versus just say, well, I think I'll just fudge a little bit and end up making it wider or offset, and then you got another one to make, and you don't have a true measurement to be consistent, you know?
Okay. This one's right on. This one I made too tight. Okay, see? That's what you're talking about.
Right.
A lot of ways you can do that. You can use a dado plane. Rob's not here, so
Okay.
we're not doing hand stuff today. Or you can take a block, a little sandpaper, just,
Oh, okay.
and you'll have it. Don't sand too much, because you can sand a fair amount really quick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
now, Larry had a, thing, he was doing some dados, and he was trying to do a blind dado. And one of the things that I talked to him about was that when you're doing a blind dado,
What is a blind dado?
a blind dado, that's where the dado stops short of the front of the shelf. This is a through dado. So that dado would stop here.
Got it.
And you don't want that, of course, you don't want people to see the joint. So what you would do is take your board and cut it out and notch it so that dado would sit down in there. And then you would take and when you put your board into it, it would cover that blind spot. Take and not show the
And
full
and
dado.
here's how you...
Or maybe I'm not explaining that better, maybe there's somebody that can do
This
it better.
is an easy way to do it.